First, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Hello, everyone. This is Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. As always, appreciate you joining us here for our live streams on our apps, our website, and our social media channels. So lots of places to find this, and we cover a lot of topics on this show. Today, we are talking about a study released by OHSU having to do with Alzheimer's and a new way that people can get Alzheimer's. It's a new way as far as how a vascular way that they can actually have determined that people can get it. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. Obviously, I am not a medical doctor, so that is why we have Dr. Stephen Back joining us here to talk about this. And Doctor, I really appreciate you joining us to discuss this study and to cover, what it is and what it means for everybody. And so I'm hoping maybe you can give a good explanation here to everybody of what this study was, and then we'll kind of go into the story of it.
Sure. So we've had a long-standing interest in what we would call the vascular causes of dementia. This is where it's extremely common that as we age, we have reduced blood flow to the brain. This blood flow is reduced to typically deeper parts of the brain that contain the white matter of the brain. So if you think about the brain, the outer part of the brain, what we call the cerebral cortex, if you will, is the gray matter. It's the thinking, emotional part of the brain. And all those brain cells talk to each other through nerve fibers that course deeper in the brain through the white matter. So the white matter tracks are kind of the cables that connect different parts of the brain. And one of the important things to know about the white matter, some people may have heard about white matter diseases like multiple sclerosis, for example. White matter is very important for allowing the rapid communication of information across different brain regions. And one of the great evolutionary advances of our brains is that we have been able to develop an insulation for the white matter called myelin. This is kind of a fatty substance that wraps around the nerve fibers and serves to promote faster transfer of information from one brain region to another. Now, if we didn't have myelin, our brains would actually have to be about the size of a house in order to communicate at the speeds that we need to get information from one brain region to another. So it's an evolutionary advance that allowed us to scale down the size of our brains and still rapidly transmit information from one region to another. Now, why do I mention this? It's because when you have low blood flow to the brain, one of the structures in the brain that's particularly vulnerable is this insulation with nerve fibers. We're getting a lot of background.
I'm sorry?
I hear a lot of talking in the background. I'm not sure if that...
Oh no, that's okay. Yeah, we're live here in the newsroom, so that's what you're hearing. But you're coming through just fine.
Okay, I'll try to ignore that while I'm talking. So, in any event, the myelin is particularly vulnerable to break down in the setting of decreased blood flow to the aging brain. And so, one of the key discoveries in this study that we did is that there's a particular cell type that is involved with chewing up the myelin debris that's breaking down. So in other words, if the myelin breaks down, it has to be cleared out of the brain because it's sort of like garbage that can't, it's toxic to the brain and needs to be cleared out. And the cells that do this job, that clear the myelin debris out of the brain are uh, uh, placed under considerable stress. And no one had realized that these cells were actually stressed to the point that they were dying in the brain in extremely large numbers. So this is the first identification of a new cell type in the brain um, that actually is dying during uh, during dementia, whether it be related to Alzheimer's or vascular causes.
So
I
this
should
is contributing to that, and it was unknown before that this was one of the pathways for that to happen.
Right. And the important thing to realize here is that in most aging individuals um, who have dementia or cognitive decline, Alzheimer's is not the only cause. We tend to use Alzheimer's synonymously with dementia, but in fact, the two leading causes of dementia are low blood flow to the brain, what we call vascular causes of dementia, and the other major cause is Alzheimer's disease, which targets neurons in the gray matter of the brain. Um, so we had not realized that there were also cells dying in the white matter part of the brain, both in Alzheimer's and in vascular dementias. And so this is a major new target that we need to consider, particularly because these cells that are dying are absolutely critical to the health of the brain in terms of regulating inflammation. And so when you take these cells out of the equation, you really disrupt the brain's ability to regulate inflammation in the brain. And we think that this may be contributing to inflammatory disturbances in the brain.
So with this, with this study and having this now be a contribution to that, to understanding a little bit more of what, could be causing the diseases and dementia, what does this mean now for future? Now that you have this study, you've discovered this, which was previously unknown. What does this mean going forward for research and study into Alzheimer's and dementia and any other kind of disease along those lines?
Sure. Yeah, well, I think what makes this an interesting and important discovery is that there's a growing appreciation for the mechanism, the cause of death of these cells that we discovered. So we not only discovered that they were dying, but we discovered how they were dying. And turns out there's a lot of different ways that cells can die in the nervous system and in other parts of the body. And this particular form of death is being triggered by accumulation of iron within the cells. So it turns out that this myelin, this insulation that wraps the nerve fibers, is highly rich in iron. And so when the cells gobble it up, and I may not have mentioned, but these are called microglial cells. So when these particular inflammatory cells, these cells that regulate inflammation, the microglia gobble up the myelin, they consume a lot of iron as well as fatty materials, and that renders these cells particularly vulnerable to an iron-mediated form of cell death, which is emerging as an important new cause of cell death that hadn't been recognized until relatively recently. Recent studies have suggested that this is important in Parkinson's disease, and our studies now support a role for this form of iron-mediated cell death in Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. So of course this is an important discovery because there's such large numbers of people who suffer from Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. Collectively, these are the major causes of decline in nervous system function as we age.
And so now that this, is this something that, say, pharmaceutical companies can come in and use this information to maybe find a way to counteract that or combat this cause of those diseases?
Yes, so that's one of the exciting new directions for these findings is the possibility that we could selectively target this part of the Alzheimer cascade, if you will, with specific drugs that can block this iron-mediated form of cell death. So it gives us a bigger arsenal now of drugs that we can potentially use to combat Alzheimer's and vascular dementia.
I mean, that's great.
Yeah.
That's so good for so many people. So now I suppose that's probably a ways out. I imagine that takes a long time to get those studies completed. I'm not sure exactly the process of new pharmaceuticals, but just the fact that this study contributed to that, and can possibly contribute to ways to battle it, I think is really great. So for OHSU, going forward, do you continue to study along these lines, or have you moved into something else when it comes to studying for dementia and diseases of the brain?
So you want to know our next secrets, huh? What's coming?
I suppose you can't tell me that.
It's top secret, but I'll give you some hints. So we're particularly interested in the scope of cell types that might be vulnerable. We suspect that there's more going on than just simply disturbances in regulation of inflammation. There's other cell types that we're studying right now that we think are also vulnerable to this unique form of iron cell death. This opens up all kinds of new possibilities to start studying the pathways, the genes that are involved in turning on these forms of cell death, and identifying all kinds of interesting new targets that we might be able to go after to try to protect the brain against aging and dementia. So we have a team of investigators that spans from coast to coast. We collaborate with a big group at the University of Washington in Seattle. In fact, that's where all the brain tissue comes from that was donated for these studies. I should emphasize that these were all human brains that were studied here. These are not coming from animals, but from patients who suffered from dementia and made the very valiant decision to donate their brains at the time of their death. There's a special, very elaborate protocol in place in Seattle for us to collect these brains rapidly and efficiently so that we can optimize the amount of information that we get out of each and every brain. And we've literally collected over the years hundreds of these brains, which are available for study. So it's a very powerful and unique study. And we have investigators from coast to coast that make use of the brain tissue and partner with us to try to move these studies forward.
Well, I'm very glad that you're doing that, and all of your colleagues are, invested in doing that. Clearly, it's something that affects so many people from, everyone, affected in some way, whether they become a victim of it or a family member or a friend, all of that. So, yeah, such important studies. Well, Doctor, I want to thank you for sharing some of that information with our viewers too, and so that way they can understand some of the work that's going into this and have some hope, that down the road, that we can combat this in a lot better way. And that's a lot because of the study that you're doing there at OHSU and all of your colleagues. So thank you very much for joining us here on Fox 12 Now.
Thank you for reaching out. Have
Absolutely.
a good day.
You too. And for everybody joining us here on Fox 12 Now, as always, appreciate you being here for this. We cover a lot of topics on this show, including important ones like that. Coming up here in a little bit, we're going to be talking about the Portland Film Festival. So a lot of things that we do discuss here as part of Fox 12 Now. And I'm going to go ahead and sign off for right now, but I'll be back here at 1:30. So whatever platform you're watching on, please feel free to join us on that. I'll talk to you then. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.